Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Build Your Foundation for SAP Finance Transformation. This webinar, we will show you how to master your financial operations by leveraging existing skills in our Winshuttle technology. My name is Teresa Chaki, and I will be your host today. I will be going through a brief introduction of key performance indicators and an overview of our Winshuttle solution. I will also have Bill Wiseman on our call today doing a live product demonstration highlighting the features and the functionality of our product. So let's quickly run through the agenda of our webinar. First, we will run through the areas of interest in financial accounting and see how we can help streamline. We'll show examples on how adding Winshuttle solution can be an advantage to companies either new to SAP or who have been running SAP for a while. Then we'll go through a live demonstration highlighting the product and the features and the functionality of Winshuttle. Then we will wrap up with any Q&A. As a reminder, please use the question and answer box on your GoToWebinar control panel to ask any questions at any time. We will do our best to answer in real time. So let's get started by reviewing the areas of financial accounting and where we can be of benefit. First, we have general ledger postings. These financial documents are the basic unit of work for SAP finance transactions, and accurate and timely postings is essential to elements of operational efficiencies. Customers can use Winshuttle journal entry for basic park and post operations or build custom solutions for multi-party processes across groups or in shared service environments. Second, we have the asset accounting. Companies must be able to create and adjust assets and their asset accounting to reflect changes in their asset register, depreciation rules, and balance sheets. With these changes may be the result of decisions to change the accounting method, the business unit consolidation, the business operations, any kind of business mergers, or any other accounting events. Winshuttle Asset Accounting Solutions have maximum flexibility to assist with this. Third is the planning and budgeting. Everyone knows that successful planning begins with accurate, complete data on past performances and environmental factors. Winshuttle budgeting and planning solutions are optimized for transferring and maintaining their data among multiple sites. And last, there is financial master records. All SAP operations depend on high-quality master data. Winshuttle for master data provides the quickest and easiest path to better SAP master data by empowering business teams to make immediate improvements in master data processes. SAP or third-party systems to ensure that planning process produce accurate, accessible, and actionable results. Winshuttle can accommodate these custom fields or other configuration-specific information. I'm sure many people on our call today are experiencing the operational pressures of working with a less experienced or seasoned staff member, or maybe a headcount reduction. Also, the weight or burden of data gathering and the reduced training costs. Not to mention the finance transformation and pressures of increased regulatory compliance, centralized accounting functions, and the increasing transaction volumes or heavy focus on cost detail and cost reduction. All of these pressures can lead into consequences for you because of the lack of process visibility, incomplete or incorrect data, and the risk of delay. There can also be an under or overstatement of value and rework associated. It can cause a heavy dollar amount in penalties and fines or increased audit costs. With Winshuttle, we can help implement a same-day solution delivery that is flexible to deploy and leveraging existing SAP access rights. The Winshuttle Advantage will lower your company's total cost of ownership by eliminating the need for programming or developer involvement. If you've had SAP at your company for a while, the value-added companies that have been using SAP for a while can have a tight integration. It's also a better alternative to LSMW and SAP query tools. With Winshuttle, you will have a rapid implementation and a broad tool set for a mixed finance functions, and companies can benefit from the ever-changing business requirements and scalability it has to offer. If you're new to SAP at your company, you can use the Excel-centric experience with no programming, and again, the rapid implementation with no specific technical skills required, and management or stakeholders will love the lower operational cost and scalable platform. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and pass the baton over to my colleague, Bill Wiseman, to go through the features and the functionality of our Winshuttle product.
Thank you, Teresa. I appreciate that. And hopefully everyone can see my screen now.
We can see your screen, Bill, and hear you clearly.
Okay, perfectly. Thank you. So thanks for that introduction. Just a lot of great bullet points on why Winshuttle, and just, you know, we're going to try to give you some examples today that will demonstrate those benefits, you know, everything from working across cross-functional areas to a very non-programmatic approach to creating and authoring these scripts, the ability to really create a very efficient process around some of these very difficult SAP processes. So the way the demo is going to work today, the way we're going to do it is we're going to first give you an end-use examples from the end-user perspective, and then secondly we'll walk through how do we actually create these templates and scripts using the Winshuttle solution. So focusing on finance, there's many different areas around both master data and transactional data. There's really, you know, several things that SAP users do on a daily basis. And one is creating mass amounts of transactions, mass amounts of master data, and doing things like mass data maintenance. Well, we can really help speed up that process by building this repetitive template and process in order to bring efficiency to your financial area. And I can remember working in the financial area as an SAP customer and some of the processes that we went through. One, as you see here in front of you, would be loading journal entries. So at the end of the month, there's many adjustments and accruals that need to be entered into the system, and we want to make sure not only that we get all of our transactions, but that our transactions are good, valid transactions. So one thing that Winshuttle provides is the ability to validate the data before we enter it into SAP. So now if I have SAP credentials, I can validate this data. So from an end user perspective, this script and template has already been built for me, and what I'm seeing here is a check of the data within the template itself. And so you can see it's checking my line items, and it's identifying those line items that are correct and those line items that might have some issue with them. So now the end user is made aware. So now we know that these particular adjustments or documents have not been created in SAP. So what can we do? So we'll stop this. And now that the end user has been notified of the errors within the template, then they can address those. As opposed to something like an LSMW, where if you attempt to load numerous transactions into SAP and then we don't have the accurate data, then none of that data is going to get loaded into SAP. And in addition to that, it's very difficult to determine where the errors are occurring. Well, with Winshuttle, as you see, it processes through the errors. It gives you feedback on what's good, what documents were created, where errors exist, and then you can address those. So you can see I'm changing the data in my template to reflect those error messages. So now, instead of having to rerun the entire template, what we can do is just do a reprocessing of the template. Kind of a delta run, you might call it. And so now we'll recheck those. So if you think about it, what you're really doing here is enabling, the ability to maybe gather data from different people in the organizations. Maybe some people aren't as adept at SAP as others. So what we can do is we can collect this data. We can see that the data is good, or test the data before we load it into our SAP environment. Think of users like employees, casual employees, or customers or vendors that might be providing us information, and we might want to test it before we load it. So now that we've tested our data and our data is good and valid, now we can actually run our data or load our data into our SAP environment. Something I want to point out is it completely adheres to SAP security. So in order to create this transaction, I have to have the proper authorizations as if I would be in SAP. So all the user roles, profiles, and authorizations that you've established in your SAP system are the same as those when you're using the Winshuttle solution. So there's no way to circumvent the SAP security via the Winshuttle solution. And now we're creating the documents. In this case, I believe we're parking these journal entries. And as it processes through multiple journal entries here, we can see the feedback that's coming to the end user as we process through. I'll just go ahead and stop that one. So creating mass amounts of data is very important. Being accurate and complete, checking the validation is also very important, to our end users. Master data is another area that is very important to our users. So doing things like creating customers, vendors, materials, price lists or pricing conditions, this is all very important. And so in addition to being able to really check the validation before we load the data into SAP, with the transactional data, we can do the very same thing with the master data. If there's certain values within a template that maybe your end user might not know, if they have credentials from the template themselves, they can actually do an F4 lookup. So they have that interactivity within SAP or between SAP and the user. So it's really emulating that SAP user business process experience. And then we can validate and check the data here in our template. Just to make sure that our data is good before we post it. There again, making sure that all of our records are good and complete. To Teresa's point earlier, when we have issues created at the user level, those issues tend to roll upstream, causing us process issues, business issues, and ultimately P&L issues. When we think about usability, there's different ways that we can deploy the solution. I showed you in the first example a mass creation of records in SAP, mass creation of journal entries. Another way to deploy the solution would be a single document or a form. In this way, we have the header information here, the detail information below, with some validation created within the template itself. In this case, I have created a list of values from SAP, embedded them in my template, and then used them as a data validation list to actually validate the data outside of SAP before loading. There's multiple ways to check the validation. Against SAP via Winshuttle, using a list of values that you've created via Winshuttle, or outside of the Winshuttle solution within your user interface. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to creating mass amounts of data, transactional and master data, it's also very important to be able to extract data out of SAP. So Winshuttle Solutions through Winshuttle Query allows me to extract field table level information from ordinary tables or custom tables in your SAP environment. Imagine as an accountant how important it is, the budgeting process, something that starts early in the planning year and continues through a large part of the year with many, many iterations of the budget taking place. In this case, what I'm going to do is actually extract the data out of my SAP system, and then we're going to load the data into, or we're going to make changes to that data and then load that data into my SAP system. Cost center budgeting could be one example. Another example might be doing something like creating or changing our master data. What about things like asset accounting? Well, we need to pull a subset of data out of SAP, and then we need to load that data and change that data, update that data back into our SAP environment. All of this is very possible our Winshuttle solution. So having a little technical difficulty here. Just for a second, I'm going to close a couple of these files down, and then we'll restart those up. So I noticed there's one question out there, and I'd like to address that. Someone was talking about, well, what if you have multiple business processes? Well, one way to manage those multiple business processes is by linking the scripts together in SAP. Imagine the procure to pay or the order to cash process, where we have multiple transactions that are involved in the process itself. So now with Winshuttle, what we can do is we can actually create these transactions. Let's say, for instance, a purchase requisition, and then we can link that together with something like a purchase order, and then we can link that together with a goods receipt document, and then we can link that together with maybe an invoice document. So with Winshuttle, we can create these different examples of business processes, you know, whether it's record to report or whether it's order to cash. Okay, I think what I'm going to do now, since I'm having a little bit of difficulty there, we're going to go ahead and we're going to walk through the authoring process. How do we actually create one of these scripts? So this is the offering component. What you've seen today is the end user experience. So we'll start now by creating a new transaction. So let's create a vendor in our SAP system. The nice thing about Winshuttle, it allows me to use my license across my various SAP instances. But again, it adheres to the security of my SAP system. So basically, at the basis of any good script, we have to record, map, and deploy one good transaction. In this case, we're creating a vendor. As Teresa mentioned earlier, it works across many, many functional areas in SAP. One of them definitely is finance. So we're going to create a new vendor, and we'll put in our information. And what Winshuttle is doing is it's recording my keystrokes, the selections I make, the screen selections that I make. And then in the mapping process, all of this will be revealed to me. Now, something important to point out is the fact that within this process, it not only records the fields that I touch during the recording process, but also the fields that are not enabled or not touched. And you'll see that when we go through the mapping. And then I can just navigate through the screen. So imagine a vendor. There's 7 or 8 different screens when we're going through. It takes quite a while to create a new vendor. But if I record the fields that I need and then map them to a template, then really all I have to do is define those elements. We'll put in our required information. Our payment terms. Maybe there's a dunning procedure that we need to follow. And then when I'm happy with my transaction the way that I want it to run for my end user, then I'll save it. So Winshuttle is finalizing my recording. And now do is take me to the mapping process. And in the mapping process, we'll determine how we want it to be deployed, if it's Excel or Access or maybe a Google spreadsheet or maybe an HTML form. And then also, how do I want it to appear to my end user? Okay, our recording was successful. And so, like I said, one good recording of a document, in other words, one good journal entry, one good creation of a master record, that's really the basis. So when we get into the mapper, what we see is really what we did. Here are the values that I keyed in. Here are the fields that I touched. Here are their technical field names. If I take an expert view of it, I can see the screens that I went into, what I did in each individual screen, like this is the header information, and then I entered on into the next screen. And sort of navigationally, you can see all the screens that I went through. If I open this up, I can see that not only were the fields that I used recorded, but every field in every screen was recorded as I went through that process. So if I later wanted to include in my solution maybe the city postal code or the city, then I could just simply check those and enable them. And in the same way, if there's fields you want to remove, you can disable them. So now let's do the mapping. As we mentioned earlier, it's very non-programmatic in nature. We're just going to do a simple drag and drop. I want my vendor account number in column A. I want my purchasing org in column B. Maybe I want to skip a column here and put my vendor account group in column D. And then maybe I want my reconciliation account in column E. So there's no defined sequence that you have to follow. So the benefit there is if I have documents, source documents outside of SAP, I can open those here in the mapping and then simply map to those documents. So let's say, for instance, you're maintaining your vendors in another system or your materials in another system. I can just open those up, and now I can refresh or load the data into SAP using that other source document. So at the end of the process, what you end up with is that runner or that end user file that we started the demo with today. So I'm going to save this. And we'll save our author file. So the author file will stay with the person that actually builds the script. Typically, these are people that know the SAP transaction. So we recorded the transaction, we mapped it to our template, and now really all we have to do is add some data to our template and then load our data into SAP. So I'll open my data file. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy a few of these records down, and then we'll change the naming convention. Actually, I think we already created this one in the first, so we'll just delete that one. We're going to create these 5 new records. Maybe we want to change our name so that we don't have duplicates when we go to validate. All right. So now I've entered my data into my template. The other thing I can do is I can actually publish the script within the template itself in order to enable the end user to be able to load the data directly from the template. So I'll say OK, yes, and now we're actually ready to run the transaction. We'll now open our file, and what we'll see is we'll see the embedded transaction, so we'll open that up. So the process of recording the SAP transaction, mapping it to the, our user interface of choice. Again, you have options, Excel or Access or maybe an HTML form. And then being able to update my data and then load it. As I mentioned earlier, through data maintenance, we can actually extract this same information via Winshuttle, drop it into this template, and then load this data into my SAP system. So let's just say, okay, we're creating vendors. We'll put in some notes so that this will be retained with our log file information. Log into our system. In addition, single sign-on and auto log-on files can be created. So if you want to, you can record these and save these, and so that you don't have to repetitively log on to the system. These are really just deployment options that you have available to you. So you've seen me walk through a few examples here today. We've talked about creating the master data. We've talked about creating different transactional type data, journal entries, vendor invoices, asset updates, you name it. There's a multitude, of options across these multiple functional areas. I think back to when I was actually an SAP customer, and I was collecting data from a lot of different cost centers and a lot of different cost center managers. And wouldn't this have been a wonderful way to capture the data from these end users? They could put it into a template of my choice, and then once I collect that data, then I can validate it and load it into SAP. I mentioned being able to query. We can do things like that. In other words, if I want to extract a subset of data, because as we know in finance, things are always changing. Plans are always changing. Budgets are always changing. So being able to extract a subset of data out of SAP. And to my end users, I can offer up to them a criteria so that they can specifically define that subset of data. Maybe in this case, they can put in a range of account numbers, or maybe all the vendors that belong to a certain planning group. And then they can call that data out of the SAP system. Then they can just use Winshuttle transaction. They can make their changes. They can put in their new descriptions maybe here, and then load these changes back into the SAP system via the transaction process. So we refer to this as, we call it data maintenance. We also kind of refer to this as a round-trip update process. So in other words, extracting and then giving my end user the ability to change, and then giving my user the ability to update the data in SAP from that same template. So we extracted it. You saw me updating some of my records, and now we're going to take those changes and we're going to load those back into my SAP system. If I log into SAP, I'll see within these changes of these different account numbers my user credentials associated with the account changes. So you don't give up any of the auditability of SAP. What we can do is provide you with additional layer of governance and compliance on top of the SAP system. So you've seen a variety of ways that we can automate some of these financial processes. Now what I'll do is I'll turn it back over to Teresa, and she can share with you maybe a bit more resource information and things that can be provided to you if there is further interest in this area. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Bill, and great job. And we'd like to go ahead and wrap up with and take any questions that you guys may have. So please feel free to provide any questions in the chat box displayed on your GoToWebinar window. And just to touch on some key takeaways from our presentation today, we want to make sure that we are conveying the message that with Winshuttle, we're able to align the business process improvement across organizations. It's got multiple interface options. It's secure and compliant. I think Bill did a great job of highlighting that. The ease of no programming, so the cost associated with that diminishes when you implement a Winshuttle solution into your company. Companies become more adaptable to change, which I know Bill Wiseman did a great job of showing that feature and functionality. And then also being able to achieve an ROI as fast as possible. Again, my name is Teresa Chaki, and below is my phone number and my email address. You can reach me at any time with any questions that you may have. Bill, just looking at our polls here, it looks like we are good and there are no questions out in the audience. So I'd like to go ahead and wrap up at this time and say thank you for your interest in Adaptive Corporation and our Winshuttle solution, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Teresa.